Do we control our emotions, or are they something that just happen to us? The way that I am going to talk about this question is through my own experience. If this doesn't relate to what happens in your mind, that's fine. You'll have the opportunity of hearing a different perspective and a different way of viewing things. I think that makes life all that more interesting. It's the spice of life. Different ideas, different ways of viewing things, different theories, perspectives, models of reality, and so forth. And my model of reality, the way that I make sense of the universe and make sense of myself, is that the systems of understanding that we use, that we wrap around reality. Over the last couple days, I've talked about some of these parts of these systems of reality. For example, the roles that we play in life, our social relationships, our political and religious affiliations, all our ideas, all the labels that we've assigned to reality after we've divided into separate pieces and tried to relate it back to each other. All of these ideas are what I would refer to as our conceptual map of reality. And I would say that our emotions actually result from an interaction with our mental system. Our mental way of viewing things ends up influencing what we end up experiencing emotionally. Let me just give an example. Say you're going to the grocery store, and on the far side of the parking lot, you notice that there's a spot open. And you're like, sweet, cool, I'm going to go over there. And as you do, somebody pulls right in front of you and takes the spot. Now, what are you experiencing emotionally? If you're like the typical American or somebody in modern society, you're probably experiencing a flash of anger or contempt or rage. But I would say that that emotional experience that you're having at that moment is actually the result of a judgment that you've made. You've judged this situation in one way or another, and as a result of your judgment, you're experiencing an emotion now. But I would say that the emotion can't actually exist without the judgment that led up to that emotion. Like you can't experience embarrassment if you don't think the situation to be awkward. You can't be angry with someone if you don't think that they've somehow wronged you. Or you can't feel depression if you don't find the situation to be gloomy. So a judgment comes first, and then as a result of that judgment, you end up experiencing a certain emotion. And I think that we have the ability to change the way in which we evaluate something. We can change our judgments. We can recognize these judgments while they happen. And I think that most people are sort of unconscious of the fact that they're always evaluating the circumstances that are around them. And they're always judging. I mean, they might be slight judgments. I mean, what sort of bag of chips you reach for in the cupboard, or what gas pump you go to, or how many steps you end up taking to the door, or what shoe you end up tying first, or what beverage you decide to drink during your coffee break. All these are judgments and decisions that you're making constantly evaluating, constantly making judgments. And as a result of these judgments, again, whether consciously making them or unconsciously making them, you end up acquiring a certain emotion. Now, I think that you can end up changing your evaluation of a situation. You can end up changing the way that you perceive something, or the way that you make sense of reality. You can change your mental model to adjust to any situation that you want, to experience any emotion that you want. And the trick to it is you have to be aware of the fact that you're making a judgment. You have to catch yourself in the act. You can't just subconsciously or unconsciously let it slip by. But if you're aware of it, if you can spot the judgment that you've made, and you can change your judgment, or you can change the way that you evaluate the situation, you can change your emotion. Let's go back to the example I talked about earlier. Let's go back to the parking lot, and somebody just took your spot, and you judge the situation that this was against your favor, and now you're angry with the person, and your adrenaline is pumping, and your entire body's flush with all these different chemicals that are like for the fight or flight. type response, but the response is ridiculous because you're really not being all that threatened, but the way in your mind is relating to your environment, it is feeling like a threat. But let's go back and judge the situation through a new lens. So instead of thinking that somebody taking your spot in the parking lot is all that against your favor, because if you think about the grand scheme of things, I mean, how really bad is that? It's awfully superficial. It's really ridiculous to think that that is all that bad for you, or that troublesome, or that much of a complication in your life. Because think about it, I mean, well, let's evaluate the situation through a little more drastic lens. Like, you didn't get bombed, nobody shot at you in the parking lot, there wasn't an angry mob ready to steal your vehicle or anything like that. Everything in your environment is really gorgeous, maybe it's just a beautiful day outside, and there's countless things that are going in your favor, but you just sit there and you judge that one aspect to be detrimental, to be against your favor, to be something that makes you feel wronged. But if you change the evaluation to the one that I mentioned, where it's a little more of a broad way of thinking about the situation, that situation is just fine. It's not bad at all. And as a result of that change in evaluation, you don't feel anger anymore. You might just laugh it all off because it's so ridiculously superficial. It's not a problem at all. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, that's not an issue. That's not a problem. But your emotions change when you change your perception, when you change how you make sense of situations, when your mental, shall we say, maps that you've wrapped around reality, when they change and they alter, you have different experiences in your emotions. But I want you to not take these ideas at face value. I want you to go and experience these things for yourself. Don't take anything that I say too literally, because again, I think the barometer for all truth is you have to experience it yourself. This is just secondhand information. Go see if you can catch yourself in the act of judging something. Reevaluate the situation through a different lens and see as to whether or not your emotions change. And the way that I like to think about it, just to use a metaphor, is that you can think of your judgments as being train tracks that can be switched to a wide variety of different emotions. So if you evaluate something in one direction, you'll change the track to, so let's just say, a depressive state. Or if you judge the situation through a different lens, you'll end up changing the track, and then it'll end up going towards a destination where you experience happiness or joy or elation or all these other wonderful emotions. But it's the judgment that ends up flicking the switch of the track that goes from one area to another. But again, you have to gain conscious control of that. You have to see yourself judging things, and I think that that's sort of the key to gaining mastery of your emotions. Because as I mentioned earlier, you can't experience certain emotions unless you've judged the situation in one way or another. So by being more aware of how you evaluate your environment, and it does help to really broaden your sense of what's in your favor and what's against your favor. Because I think that a lot of people's ideas of what's against their favor is so ridiculous. It's just pathetic, actually. Let's just think about an actual dangerous situation. Like, let's just say you're in the middle of the woods and, you have a pack of wolves that just surrounded you. Okay, all right, you have absolute 100% justified feeling of fear in this situation, and that state prepares you to run or fight. I mean, you have adrenaline pumping through you. Your body is primed for action, and that's good. It's a very wonderful tool for survival, because in that situation, well, you're going to be performing physically at your best possible level, and you can try to outrun the wolves or beat them up, maybe. Probably not, but you can try, and you're going to be in the right state to do so. But the thing is that constantly throughout our days, we end up experiencing these emotions. Like, we're out in the woods being chased by wolves, but it's completely arbitrary. People taking our parking spots, people stepping in front of us in line at a store, some kid is crying and you think that the parents are mishandling the situation and now you feel contempt. Again, judgments. Judgments, judgments, judgments. You're constantly making them. You're constantly evaluating your environment. And it's how you evaluate that determines what you'll eventually experience emotionally. So, by gaining control of how you evaluate, by broadening the spectrum to something a little more inclusive, like, as I mentioned earlier, like you're not getting shot at, you're not getting bombed by another country, you're not being tortured at that moment. I mean, there's a variety of things that you can think about that are absolutely horrible and horrendous, and by using that as a way of evaluating what's occurring around you now, everything is pretty darn good. It's not that bad at all, in fact. I want to just point out again that I believe that we are in control of our emotions. This is something that you can eventually master, but I'm going to say to a certain degree, because although I think that we can consciously direct our emotions, that I don't think that this is the whole story. I don't at all, in fact. Actually, I believe that emotions can be something that can happen to us as well. Like, for example, when you click off your rational mind or your thinking mind, that's always evaluating in judgment. If you go to a non-judgmental state where you're not thinking at all, you're not judging, you're not labeling things around you with good or bad or right or wrong or anything like that. You're in a state of just absolute being. And also emotions can arise in those states. And I think that's just more of a feeling aspect. You can actually feel certain changes within your body, and as a result of that, that's actually the emotion. So maybe there's an environmental disturbance that influences something in your body, and your body subconsciously synergizes all of this information together, and that manifests itself as a feeling. And that feeling is what we call intuition. So it's a feeling. You can feel stuff in your environment as well too, but you have to sort of click off your rational mind. Because your rational mind, to a certain extent, can make you feel whatever you want to feel, but as a result of that skill, you sort of lose your ability to gain information from your environment. Because you're not listening to your environment. You're not allowing the changes to affect your mind, and I think that's the information that the environment is sending you. You gain one thing, but you lose another. And it's the same thing for the other way around. If you don't use your mind at all, you can be susceptible to the shifting fortunes of your environment. But I think that's an interesting way of thinking about your emotions. You can control them, and you can actually use them as a source of information as well.